Many thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa. I'm Rhoda Odhiambo. We start in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where Burundi has shut its borders following the capture of a strategic town of Uvira by Rwandan-backed M23 rebels. The move has cut off a key trade and supply route and raised fears of a wider regional conflict. Now, the border closure has had an immediate impact on civilians and commerce. Over the weekend, there were reports of fuel shortages in Burundi's economic capital, Bujumbura. Now, the UN says thousands of people have been displaced, with many fleeing into Burundi. Some of the residents who have returned have described an easy calm, with shops closed and economic activity at a standstill. Here are some voices from the DRC-Burundi border.
There were many deaths. I personally saw a motorcycle driver who was in front of me in Luberizi. A bomb fell in front of him as people were fleeing, and people died with him. Almost 9 people died in Sange too. People died as a result of bombs that we didn't know whether they came from the enemy, M23, or FARDC.
Some people left town, but we stayed, even though things are not back to normal yet. We have not resumed our usual activities because there's no money coming in. We spent 2 days at home. Nobody was working, but we're in good health.
Now, that situation is drawing international attention. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Rwanda's role in the M23 offensive in South Kivu province violates a peace deal brokered by U.S. President Donald Trump, a claim that Kigali denies. Now, earlier this month, the presidents of DR Congo and Rwanda met in Washington with President Trump and reaffirmed their commitment to a peace deal known as the Washington Accord. Meanwhile, the M23 rebel group says it could continue its advance beyond South Kivu province. The rebel-appointed provincial governor made the remarks at a news conference in Uvira.
Katanga is a province like any other. Wherever there are abuses, killings, massacres, mismanagement, we will go there. We'll go to Central Kasai if necessary. We can go to Bujimai or Kananga if there are problems there. We'll go to stop them. We want to stop Tshisekedi and his gang of friends who are looting this country. We will stop him by force if necessary.
And aid organization Doctors Without Borders has warned that health systems in eastern DR Congo are collapsing, with tens of thousands displaced. Now, earlier on, I spoke to Dr.Javid the international president of MSF, who recently briefed the UN Security Council on the humanitarian crisis there. And I began by asking him why ongoing peace efforts are yet to deliver tangible results for the people in eastern DR Congo.
We said at the United Nations Security Council on Friday that we can see that the focus of peace agreements seems to be around resource extraction and is not centering the needs of civilians. And so that's our main call. Our first and foremost, we ask that peace agreements and political agreements center the needs of the population. And then secondly, that humanitarian access should not be restricted, and that includes reopening Goma and Bukavu airstrips. Since the front line shifted around Uvira in the recent week, moving supplies has meant that we have to cross an international border 4 times, and that increases the cost by 4.
If you're to focus specifically on what the people living in the eastern part want, what does peace look like for them, putting aside the interests of the mineral or critical resources in the eastern part of the country?
In regards specifically to healthcare, we're seeing extreme levels of sexual violence against women, girls, boys, and men. The statistic that we found in the first 6 months of 2025 is that across the MSF-supported facilities in Eastern DRC, we've received an average daily of 155 survivors seeking care. Every day, 155 survivors of sexual violence seeking care. And of course, we have to remember then that there are many who don't arrive at healthcare.
So what do you think the actors of those who are pushing the Washington Accord, the Qatar peace process, what do you think they need to do differently so that they can be able to tackle the multifaceted challenges that people are facing in the eastern part of DRC?
I find it difficult to focus directly on what to instruct what political actors should do. What's clear is that even with the signing of peace agreements, there was a large offensive just days later by M23 in Uvira, which created the mass displacement that we're seeing right now. At the very least, you would imagine once you sign a peace deal that you stick to it within a few days.
And with the M23 warning of further advances, how worried should the region be about this conflict spilling over and then it becoming a wider humanitarian situation?
I can certainly say that there's a risk there. That's my take home. There is expressions of a right to self-defense by Burundi, expressions of a right to proactive defense by Rwanda, and so the risk of a wider conflict, it certainly exists.
And speaking of that takeover and with the border closures that are slowly happening between the two countries, there are also reports of the people of Bujumbura feeling the impact of certain commodities such as fuel becoming unavailable to people who need them most for their daily lives. How big of an impact or an issue is it for the people living in Bujumbura?
In any environment where there is a population living, the sudden arrival of tens or hundreds of thousands of extra people seeking safety places a burden on the resources of that area. And with respect to healthcare, which is what MSF does, and humanitarian needs, this means that, for example, a hospital that had a catchment population of X number now has to serve a great